Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lokya Kahenge. We are coming back and back with a bang. We have Tina today with us from Own Your Crones. And you don't understand, guys, we're in the presence of a superstar. Plain and simple. And I have with me my co-host today.
Hi guys, it's Manahil, and I am so thrilled to be here right now with Kinza, of course, and Tina. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you both for having me here today, and I really appreciate the kind words. I'm so excited to talk to you both today.
Thank you.
Thank you. So here at LKK, as everybody knows, we are having Tolerance and Acceptance Month, and today's topic of tolerance is tolerance and acceptance towards chronic illness. And now that like everything that comes with it, all the experiences of the chronically ill person and the care partners as well. Yeah. So with that, I would just love to hear everything that you have to say
about you.
Just tell us about yourself, your experiences, and just the awesomeness that I've just like seen.
Thank you both so much, Kinza and Manahil. So my name is Tina, as you both introduced me earlier. I have a blog and social media advocacy platforms called Own Your Crones. And really, I talk a lot about, the chronic illness experience, but also the intersection of being South Asian minority living in the U.S. with this bowel disease. And I have a number of illnesses, I think most of which originated with the Crohn's disease. And what Crohn's disease is, just to give you all an idea, is it's a form of inflammatory bowel disease. So it's really like a lot of people think, oh, it's the stomach. No, it's not the stomach, it's the intestines. And the disease can run anywhere from your mouth to your bottom. And it causes inflammation, ulcerations. It can even break through the intestines. So lots of complications, lots of surgeries potentially, depending on how severe your case is. And it's a pretty serious chronic illness that can hit when you're quite young. So I know patients that are diagnosed from birth or even in childhood. I myself was diagnosed at the age of 22, but I do think that I had multiple, they're called extra-intestinal manifestations, meaning that outside of the intestines, a lot of different issues, joint pain, eye issues, dermatological manifestations. I had a lot of that stuff growing up. So I think my diagnosis probably happened a bit later than it actually was when at 22. So my experiences, though, have been like laden with a lot of issues around tolerance and acceptance. And I think there's a couple ways to break this down, really. I think that there's tolerance and acceptance of the self. Mm-hmm. And then there's tolerance and acceptance coming from others, right? With whether they're family, friends, people who are close to you, or even from the outside society. So It's like a different layer of tolerance and acceptance. And I think for me, a lot of that, and I think, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but at the same time, just from speaking to other South Asian patients around the world, a lot of the tolerance and acceptance, our own feelings of tolerance and acceptance are coming from society's views of us.
Right.
And that's where this becomes really complicated for many of us, because this is like a whole other layer of challenge that we have to face with an illness, and that too, a really stigmatized illness that has to do with pooping. Yeah. We talk about all sorts of things that are stigmatized. We're starting to, like mental health, like sexual assault. We're starting to talk about all these things, sexual orientation. What we need to also really talk about is major chronic physical illnesses as well that are stigmatized, because the burden of these illnesses, inflammatory bowel disease, is growing by leaps and bounds in the South Asian community.
Right.
Every time I'm turning around, I'll wake up to messages from India or from, like random places on earth where a South Asian person's like, I'm in trouble. I don't know what's going on with my body. And it's just a lot of our own self-image, self-perception, ideas around shame and acceptance and tolerance are coming from not ourselves, they're coming from society. And that's what I kind of want to talk about a little bit today, if you both are open to it. Because I think this is really a very tricky subject for us. For me, what had happened in the beginning is I think I was in such denial around my illness. So this disease runs in my family. It's and which was unheard of in South Asian culture. It's considered like a Western disease of diet, of industrialization, all of that.
Right.
But the fact that this is running in my family for a few generations is perplexing, because my father had Crohn's. He passed away from colorectal cancer, from not having surgery in a timely fashion, and from being on steroids for 15 years.
Wow.
We don't use steroids for more than a few months at a time now. He died when I was 8. So that has really molded a lot of my own journey. And a lot of the reason why I do this kind of work is because I've seen what this has done to my family, and I can't see this happen over and over again to other families, in our community. So between him, so he passed away in New York. His sister, just a few years later, passed away in New Delhi. Same thing.
Oh my gosh.
And their aunt, my family's from Karachi, Pakistan. We're Sindhi, so but we're Hindu. So after partition, we moved to India and spread out around the world. But my great aunt, so their aunt, passed away. She bled to death. There was no such diagnosis back then, but they saw blood on her clothes. It was very obvious that there must have been some cancer or some Crohn's or ileitis, something going on that would have taken her life. So of course they had no treatment options back in the 30s, but she did pass away during that time. So really, there's a lot of bowel issues in my family. Aside from this, in my immediate family and in my extended family. So lots of polyps, lots of IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome, lots of all that stuff going on. So I feel like if it's going on in my family, yes, it doesn't have to be going on in other families, but if it is, even if there's one person in a family that's struggling, if I can help that one person by talking about this and saying, look, I'm also struggling, it's okay, I think that's where we can really help people. And that's why I'm trying to normalize talking about this. I'm not going to be vulgar and be like this, that about my poop, or this, that about, I have an ostomy bag. Right. I don't go to the bathroom like everybody else does, but I go into a bag. And that's another thing that's extremely taboo in our culture. So, and my dad and aunt also had one as well.
Right.
And for them, it was so taboo that they were both suicidal over it. So like, it's one of those things that this ostomy bag saved my life.
Right.
And to attach a stigma to something that can save your life, that just doesn't add up in my mind.
Yep.
So that's why I'm talking about this belief of what society thinks and what we think, what I think of myself.
Yeah.
And I think the ostomy bag is a great example of that. For me, when I was headed into surgery, I got so much feedback from my family saying, no one's going to marry you with this thing, Tina. And I was like, what's the big deal? It's just a different way of pooping.
Oh.
You know what I mean? Like, okay, so my plumbing is a little different. Like, what's the big deal? And it was this huge fight. And, me being 24 years old, you know how, like, in our culture, it's like your family, even if you're above 18, your family's involved in a lot of the decision making. So my doctors would be like, Tina, you're above 18. This is your decision. I'm like, I understand it's my body, but the family is supreme in our culture. Our family's consideration, respect for elders, the family's reputation, perception in society. So and they're like, well, you're gonna either end up with cancer or die if you don't have surgery. That's basically the ultimatum my gastroenterologist gave me when I was 24. And here, my family is like, no one's going to marry you. I'm like, if I'm not alive, what difference does
what's
it
the
make?
point?
Seriously. And then I would hear, but your dad hated his ostomy. I'm like, I'm not my dad, we've come a long way. I don't know what this is like. Let me decide for myself. So anyway, push came to shove. I ended up in emergency surgery when I was 24. And the ostomy saved my life. And I have one even today. This is my third one, because what had happened was I was given, because my family also pushed for it, I was given an internal pouch that was made out of my small intestine after my colon was removed. I didn't want it. I was fine with the ostomy. I didn't really care for it. But this is how much family is involved in our culture, right?
Oh my gosh.
And I was just like, okay, my family understands this disease. They know about it. Let me also take their input. And my surgeon was also saying, you're young enough that, you could have this reversed worst case. Reversal of that thing was not easy. It was botched. It was a huge problem. I went through a lot. And if I ever had to do it again, I would choose the ostomy hands down. I know there's a lot of social stigma involved, but when it comes to tolerance and acceptance, society, our culture does not have acceptance or tolerance for this ostomy bag for us to defecate in. Yet, who are they to decide how we should, decide to live our lives, or what medicine is saying or modern surgery is saying? This is our body. This is our life to choose. And honestly, I didn't even have an option. So it was one of those things like, how can you judge me? And how can you choose not to accept me or tolerate me because of an ostomy bag? So I think for a lot of my journey, I was sort of crying internally, like, I want to accept myself.
Right.
Like, there was this constant tug of war between modern medicine, modern surgery, and what my family wanted. And here I am, like the monkey in the middle, stuck between the two. I'm like, what about me? What about me? And I think that's what I mean when I say there's got to be a self-acceptance, a self-tolerance, a self-love in all of this, saying, I choose me.
Yeah.
I choose life for myself. And if that life looks like a stigmatized existence to the rest of the world, so be it.
Right.
I still love me. And
right.
I think that's been, the hardest part of my journey is getting to that. And I think my advocacy work over the last few years, it's going to be 3 years in March, is a culmination of that. It's saying, I choose me, and I choose to help people like me who are stuck in the middle.
Wow.
And have no option. And I'm saying it's okay to choose you. You know what I mean?
We're speechless. We're not sort of speechless. We're speechless. And thank you. Thank you for sharing about you. Thank you for sharing about your family. Thank you for tracing the problem.
Yeah.
Thank you for...
Or many problems, actually. Too many problems.
I'm sitting here and I'm like, I have chills because we're not fighting, and it should just be about managing the condition. It should be about managing the situation. And like you're saying, it should be about making yourself feel better.
Right.
Meanwhile, we have, and I wish I could give you a hug right now, like a giant hug. So like a virtual big hug. But you're talking about before we even get to figuring out how to make ourselves feel better, or this person that we love feel better, we have to figure out what 100 other people think, and make them feel better and comfortable with decisions that we have to make for ourselves or that person that we love with the condition.
Exactly.
It's horrible. It's horrible. And I'm so sorry about, your family members who had to suffer alone, who had to listen to that trash talk of XYZ saying like, but what about log kya kahenge,
Log kya kahenge?
Right.
which is not at all. And we always amaze ourselves when we like think about how literally these three words are fit into so many situations that we all are living through. And I can't believe that something as serious as
Life or death situation.
a life or death situation also is met with this ridiculous phrase which we've absolutely come to hate.
Would it be okay for me to talk a little bit about what that phrase means to
Please.
me?
Yes.
Please.
I'm just thinking, like, log kya kahenge encompasses so much, like you're saying, Kinza. Like, it's what, like, our entire mentality as a culture. And I've heard this not just in South Asian culture. I've actually heard this all over Asia.
Right.
Apparently, it's like a Far East concept too, and it's used as a way to, as much as I love our culture and all the brilliance and exuberance of our culture and what we have to offer to the world, there's just so much stifling of the self, as I was saying earlier, in terms of making sure we glorify the family. Log kya kahenge, to me, feels like a suppression of the self. It feels like a suppression of what I want or what you might want, whether it comes to, careers, whether it comes to education, whether it comes to marriage, children, basically life's most important decisions that make us who we are, right, and make us feel whole and make us feel happy in life because we're in the driver's seat to make the decisions for ourselves. Right. It's basically saying, and don't get me wrong, I think family is extremely, extremely important. And I love my family very much, and I love my extended family very much. But it's one of those things, like, there has to be a balance between the self and the family. Right. It can't just be glorification of the self or glorification of the family. There has to be an amalgamation of the two and sort of a confluence of the two working together, that I matter and my family matters at the same time. And that's what I struggle with most with log kya kahenge. It's like, we can make this work. We can, individuals can be themselves, make decisions for themselves that don't have to be so stigmatized and that don't have to bring down the family name. And the other thing that really bugs me about, this topic is every family has its skeletons. Yes. Everybody has something. God. There's mental illness in a family, there's sexual assault, there's chronic illness, there's, those are not and should not be taboo subjects. Right. We can't control these things. You know what I mean? Right. And my whole motto is, it doesn't matter what's happened to us. We haven't chosen this. Why do we have to live with that kind of shame and stigma? Why can't we garner the same respect as anybody else in society? Oh my God. And that's sort of my philosophy around log kya kahenge is, I really think that this should be about, not so much about, when your parents say to you, when you bring up like a grievance or something like that, and they're like, oh, Tina, log kya kahenge, beta chup, like that type of thing. It should be, let's talk about this. Right, let's not suppress this feeling of yours. Let's talk about it. Let's have it out in the open so that we can sort of traverse this and transcend it. But no, it's more like, let's bury it. Right. Which solves nothing.
It solves nothing, yeah.
It just adds to the stagnant pile of things that needs to get talked about. And unfortunately, it, rears its ugly head up, like, at the worst, like the worst of times. And unfortunately, sometimes in the form of, like, in the cases of, like, our unfortunately, like the males in our family, like in toxic masculinity, or like, you know, for other women, like, you know, like screaming their heads off, like behind closed doors, because we've seen that.
Yeah, or like just going, and I don't use this term lightly, but crazy.
Yes.
Because they're just not being heard.
Yeah.
And it's so unfortunate. I can't even begin to like touch on so many things that you just said. I feel like, you know, you've explained, handed down assumptions of, you know, a generalized view, which I don't even think, you know, in the name of culture or tradition, we've been trying to figure out, you know, in so many episodes what it actually achieves, because we don't know. It achieves nothing.
Yeah.
I think it makes things worse, quite frankly.
I completely agree. And unfortunately, like it has, you know, it has given this sort of like impression of, you know, people who look like us, etc., to also be, you know, have so many assumptions made about us.
Right.
You know, which in itself becomes like a thing that you have to fight. And it's terrible.
Oh my God, don't even get me started. I have to share a little bit about that, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
So that's one thing that I've been up against a lot. You know, now during the pandemic, not traveling as much for conferences or traveling internationally or any of that, you know, even going on vacation, obviously. But being that I have multiple chronic illnesses, lots of medications, lots of ostomy supplies, medical supplies that I carry. I basically have like one small suitcase for all my medical stuff, okay? And then one suitcase for everything else. Right. You know what I mean?
Right.
And usually that the one suitcase with medications and ostomy supplies is a carry-on, because I don't want it to get lost. Mm-hmm. And so being the way that I look, I could be online at Newark Airport,
right?
Okay, going to Miami for like a nice trip just for a weekend, and guess what? There's 300 people online with me at 7 a.m. to get through TSA, and the TSA officer is just going around claiming they're doing a random check, and I'm telling my husband, Anand, I'm like, watch them stop right at me. And they don't stop at him. You know, he looks very Indian. They stop at me and they're like, ma'am, we need to pull you aside for a random check. I'm like, random check my you know what? Yeah. You know, I'm laughing about this, but it's so like upsetting on so many levels. They bring their dogs out, they sniff through all my medical stuff. I'm like, this is racist, this is ableist, like this is everyist. Like, I'm sorry. It makes me so mad, and it happens in Europe too. I always get pulled aside, and I even get pulled aside by people of that background. You know, they're like, no, we see your ostomy popping up in the scanner. We're taking you into a room. We need to look at it.
Oh my God.
This is so demeaning. Like, you know, because of the way I look, it's just assumed that I could be carrying drugs in it. Mm-hmm. I've been actually said that too. Many times. And they're like, we need you to touch it and then touch these strips. And they run the strips through their machine to check if there's any like cocaine. I've asked, what are those strips? They're like, they're for drugs. And they bring the dogs in to sniff all my stuff. I've gotten to a point where I've gotten used to it and show up now to the airport early because I've nearly missed my flight a few times. But like, and I've also gotten to the point where I just opt out of the scan now because I'm like, why am I, you know, subjecting myself to more radiation? Right. If I don't need to, if they're going to pull me aside to basically search me, they go all throughout, they search me all throughout, and then they want to see my ostomy, and they take me into a room. And it's just, and this happens a lot to me internationally, and it's just like, you shouldn't have to get used to that. That's another piece of this that I shouldn't have had to get used to, but it's a reality, and it's not fair. Just because I look like able-bodied, you know, and I look a certain way, they drag me in just to make sure that, you know, I don't I'm not carrying drugs or I'm not doing anything illegal. And that's just such an unfair assumption.
You would think that at this point, and like, what we like to call as the 21st century, we are just a little bit more decent and, I don't know, enlightened, or maybe just, I don't know, informed?
Understanding, maybe? I don't know, like, what? Do you just assume and then let dogs just, like, sniff your things? I'm just, like, speechless right now. I don't... And, and this is interesting because I've never actually heard about this, like this before, like, from this perspective. So this is very eye-opening. Definitely.
If we're going to talk about, perception and especially self-perception, this takes a toll on a person, like, tolerance and acceptance for themselves, because it's like, okay, we're talking about, circles of society, but then we're also talking about, the system, the way the system is set up. TSA is set up, and international agencies are set up for people to fly in and out. I understand there are things that have happened in the past, but, I should not be profiled racially, especially given everything else that I'm dealing with.
Yeah,
right.
By the time I get on the plane, I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's such a process. And, my husband will be waiting a half an hour just on the side, to make sure I get through. And I feel for him too. Like, it's not easy for him. And he's just like, it shouldn't be this way for you.
Yeah.
He's a little bit darker skinned. He looks more Indian. They let him go. And for me, my name was Tina Aswani for 7 years of my marriage. I've been married 10 years. When Trump got elected, I added my husband's last name because Aswani sounds, like a last name. It's actually, I think there's the Aswan Dam in Egypt.
Right.
And I often get asked if I'm from that region of Egypt.
Wow.
I've even been asked from Egyptian people. So this is very hard for me. Like, not that I have any problem with being of any descent or, but I think it just needs to be more acceptance and understanding that just because you might be from a certain area or you might look a certain way doesn't give people a right to profile you and assume that, that you could be carrying things that you're not.
Seriously. I mean,
just like everybody else.
This whole specific, randomly getting checked because of being brown thing is getting so old now. It's just getting so old. Like, I think we've come to a point, I'm not saying bad things can't happen, but I feel like we've come to a point where I don't think that any sane brown person would, like, even try doing something at an airport anymore. It's just, it just sounds so overplayed. And I'm not invalidating everything that has happened, but, like, come on, like, just stop. Like, it's so overplayed now. And it's bad enough that they're, pulling you out because of your skin color. And then to just, like, I just can't get over the fact that, they take you and then they search through your stuff and then, maybe even accuse you of having drugs. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's too much. And then, I'm sorry, the dog thing is a little too much. They'll open up my bags right in front of me. The dogs will come and sniff.
No.
Like, there'll be 2 or 3 of them at a time. And I'm just like, this is so demeaning.
This is... Wow.
As it is, I feel horrible about having these illnesses, not being able to do as much as I would like to, or be as productive, or, accomplish the things that I may have wanted to accomplish. And here we are, and you're going through all my things like this. You know what I mean? It's just so humiliating to be pulled aside like that. So that's just an added layer of stress to being chronically ill, and then on top of that, adding to the issues around tolerance and acceptance of yourself.
Yeah,
in
right.
society, if organizations like this are not accepting you for who you are, how are you going to accept yourself? That's the other part of this.
I think that
It's a huge part.
I think that you mentioned something before. You said able-bodied. They see me as, a person who doesn't need a wheelchair. So you know what? This is the fine category and
Right.
can be treated, if anything, like worse and blah, blah, blah. Because I refuse to believe that there are not other people that don't take flights who don't have an ostomy bag or, who like... I refuse to believe that.
I mean,
Many of us.
I thought it would be part of their training by now. Like, to be able to, like, just be more understanding towards anybody who needs to be just let through now. But it's insane.
And I have a letter. Like, I have a letter
Right.
indicating that I might be carrying injectable medicine and that I might be, that I have an ostomy, So it's very, like, appalling to me to still have to go through this. And I've mentioned this at ostomy support groups and even inflammatory bowel disease support groups, and people are just horrified because outside of our skin tone, outside of being brown, this doesn't happen to people.
Right.
And I've sort of asked it, like, is this happening to you all as well? And everybody's like, oh my God, this is happening to you. You need to complain. You need to do. I'm like, it's going to do nothing.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go to the airport a half an hour early. Like, it's going to do nothing. Like, it's just, that's the thing. Like, if there's groups of us complaining about it, then maybe something.
You're
right.
That's why I asked. So it's definitely a struggle. Being sort of looking a certain way, looking young, looking able-bodied,
right.
And not actually being that way. Now, there's been times when I've had a wheelchair at the airport. Like last year, I busted my ankle really badly, and I was going to a conference. So I needed a wheelchair. Meanwhile, people are staring at me. I'm like, do you not see the boot that I'm in? People are staring at me for using a wheelchair. So, like, you can't win.
No.
You can't win when people are like, you look great.
Yeah.
You lost a few pounds. You look great. I'm like, yeah, that's actually probably because I'm malnourished. Like, I'm not absorbing. But, like, and on the other hand, if you use a wheelchair or you use a mobility aid of some sort, I had vertigo so I'm immunocompromised. I'm on something called biological agents, which, can modify your immune system to prevent, Crohn's flares.
Right.
And this is in other autoimmune conditions, MS, rheumatoid arthritis, other things as well, that these medications are used for. So I picked up the flu on a plane one time 4 years ago. The flu actually got into my brain and my GI system. I was hospitalized because I coded in the hospital when they admitted me. I had something called vertigo. So it was very dizzy, sort of could not keep my balance, walk straight. Plus I had a GI infection, and they're like, you have the flu. And I'm like, I have all this from the flu. And they're like, yeah, because you're on biological agents and that can make you more immunocompromised. So you could get hit really hard with the flu if you don't get the flu shot. And I didn't get the flu shot that year, lo and behold. And of course I get it all the time now, but I was using a walker in the hospital because I could not walk after that episode. And I remember specifically an Indian doctor who was on my case, and I think he was new, laughing at me when I walked out with a walker.
No, this makes me so sad.
Now, tell me, how do I come to accept myself if the Indian doctor on my case is laughing?
You don't. We wish that we could tell you that we had better stories about, like, from our personal experience or anything like that. In the worst of mom's flares and relapses, we have had walkers and, like, sticks and stuff like that.
And us as her walking stick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally get it.
And my mother is, we actually talk about this all the time, and, we have her permission and sort of like her blessing to talk about these things, because she has been one of those people that has never fully been able to accept her condition because of Lok Kya Kahenge, because of the fact that people stopped, or people never believed that she actually had an autoimmune condition. Right. It was always about, oh, you know what, why don't you go to this Hakim or like this healer?
Right.
Why don't you go to like, that person who might have done like, some sort of black magic on you? Oh, why don't you do
Why don't
like,
you read this?
why don't you read this? Why don't you read that? Yeah. It's been horrible. And, despite the fact that she had an invisible illness that was not very well known in Pakistan, we were actually in Pakistan when she got diagnosed. She has never accepted the fact that she has MS. And when you don't do that, or at least this is our, experience, you actually don't want to look at different ways that, can actually help you as well.
Right. Which is so hurtful.
Which was really hurtful.
And we can only push her to a certain limit, and then she has to do the rest herself. But
when other family members call it a problem, rather than a condition that they're able to, look up a definition or understand. And by the way, like our family are, and some of them listen to this, and so we are not like, we've had frank conversations, or we've tried to have frank conversations from our perspective. But like, when people, and they're intelligent people, but like, if somebody, if us in general, we are not willing to understand what a certain loved one is going through and maybe help them in ways that can be, helpful in them accepting it themselves.
Right.
They can't possibly begin to, start getting better on a scale that, that matters.
Right.
And so those walkers or those walking sticks have been looked at as, or like thrown away as like, insults, because I am, in her words, she
I'm
is not,
this.
I'm
Yeah.
not this.
I'm not this.
I'm fine. I'm, same thing going on with like mental health or, seeing a therapist. It's like, nope, I'm good. I'm all right. And meanwhile, like, we can clearly see that anybody who lives with a chronic illness also knows that it's a big mental health, component to it. So,
and she knows that too, like she has had days when she was in bed and would just knock him out of her room. So she knows that too. But I think the thing is that she just never got that support from not our family, like her daughters and her husband, but I think her
own family.
Her own family. Like
extended family,
her own family. Yeah, which
also
really
that
sucks.
validation from like society, that this exists. I'm complaining about it. You don't believe me. There's a huge problem there. There's a huge like divide there.
Yeah.
Yes.
It makes you feel like you're crazy.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And we've seen it firsthand. I just witnessed a conversation between her and a family member. I don't want to say exactly who. Say this, that, she was like, oh, nobody really has the patience to sit down and have a conversation with me. And this other family member was like, oh, they say that you just don't speak. And, it just took everything in me to not just, like, go up to them and just yell at them. But I let the adults have their conversation, so it's okay. But, I was just like, why? Like, she, this family member was like, yeah, you just don't, say anything to them. You just don't make the conversation. She's like, nobody even tries to come and sit with me. And, like, for example, like, if we're at a family dinner, she always sits towards a corner, towards the side, because she's always comfortable that way. She does not, engage with a lot of people, which is fine. That's how she's comfortable. But nobody takes the initiative to even go up to her and be like, hey, how are you doing? Nobody.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, Niall, because it's been such a struggle for me too. I completely relate to your mom, and
Right.
I'm so thankful that both of you are so supportive of her. Like, it's amazing that you're doing this, because we really have to start shattering this stigma. So for me, whether it's with my husband's side of the family, and that's already a difficult situation. It has been for years, because they've always told him, you could have done better. And yeah, like, and even on my side of the family, many extended family members are like, why would this man marry you?
Oh my
As if I had nothing to offer besides my illness. And when I go to family events, I've had to sit on the side and feel like a wallflower. And I talk about this in my writing, is I often feel like wallflower at family events because no one wants to talk to me. No one wants to acknowledge my presence because basically I lead this stigmatized existence. And now with, me being out in the open, it's just like, oh, we don't want anything to do with her. like, you know what I mean? And it's just like, so even if I go to events, like, I mean, obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic and I'm not exposing myself or anybody else. Like, it's that's a separate story. But like, when I would go to Thanksgiving or Diwali, I'd almost rather spend it with my friends.
Right.
Because my friends I've chosen and they accept me. Right. Whereas if I subject myself to some of these events, even weddings and stuff of like extended family members, people are just looking at me and I can see that they're whispering about me. Oh, that's that girl. But, like, I don't know what they're saying, but the point is like, why? Like, why does that have to be our reality? Yeah. We are just another human being. Yes, we have potentially serious health conditions. Don't make us feel like we're the other.
Right.
And that's my biggest issue here. I'm sorry that your mom's gone through it too. And it's just like, I'm a very like outgoing social person. Crohn's disease and my health is a huge part of my life. And by leaving me a wallflower on the side and acting like I don't matter means that, first of all, you're saying that this disease is all of me and that I have nothing to offer besides my disease. Plus, if you talk to me, you think that the only thing that I can talk about is my illness.
Right.
And that, that's going to make you really uncomfortable. So you don't even want to come and approach me. So, like, I mean, that's just, it's mind-boggling to me that this is the way, our society is. Why can't we be more accepting of other people? Like when I go to events and when I see somebody sort of sitting off to the side, I go and sit down next to them.
That's so nice.
And make conversation with them. I specifically go out of my way. If somebody has a visible disability or visible like sort of issue, I make sure to go out of my way. This has been me my whole life. I was diagnosed at 22, but I can't sit there and just be like, I'm going to hang out with everybody else and let that other person sort of just be a wallflower. That's not who I am. And I can't understand why other people can't do the same thing. It's not right. Include everybody.
Right.
Oh, so true.
They don't want to be a part of it. They just don't. They would rather be just gossiping about who looks at what and what's happening otherwise. They just don't want to. And, like you said, you phrased it very, very, very perfectly that, your illness is not the only thing you have to offer. Like, our mom is so smart. Like, she has so many smart conversations, but people just don't try, They'd rather just, like, slightly make fun of her, because they know she's not going to understand. And she doesn't understand. But, they'll slightly just, like, make fun of her or whatever. And, she's just thinking it's, like, light conversation. But it's not. Like, we hear it. We know what's really going on. And it's just really sucky that we can't just, like, punch them in the face. But that's not...
There's that respect for elders.
Exactly.
That pain. Right. And then we, like, if we intervene in something like that, like, we get blamed.
Yeah.
So it's... The way I look at this... is that the change has to begin with us.
It does.
We might not be able to speak up to elders without getting scolded or without being put down. But what I believe is that we can spread that awareness. And like, I might not be able to say anything to my elders, but I will continue to do this advocacy work to help change things. And I think your podcast is doing exactly that too. And I think that's the way we go about it. And we share it with other people who are younger than us and, potentially our children at some point, nieces and nephews. Like, this is how we can sort of incorporate change, I think. I think not from the elders' side, but from the generations behind us.
I love that. Because that's exactly what we were going to, and you won't believe it, but it's almost been an hour since we're talking to you.
Crazy.
Always surprises us, but thank you so much. I mean, something you said before, I think that if we start doing it in groups, if we start, saying it's not just me, I'm not the only person here, somebody else is feeling it and coming together. And that's exactly why we wanted to thank you for reaching out to us and saying, hey, can we talk? I mean, thrilling. She told me everything and it was just thrilling. But you know, I think that there's so many more things that we can talk about, but
And we will talk about,
we
hopefully.
will talk about it. We
in
would
more
love to
episodes.
have you in more for sure.
Anytime, you let me know.
Thank you. But it's definitely, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. And I definitely want to, and you already started on saying that. So what do you think right now, is actionable advice, right? For people who are listening to us, you're right, our friends, people who understand us and accept us, they're already, in small ways empowering us to do better in our lives, right? And I think that how cool would it be if like the people that are closest to us, the ones that we hang out at family dinners and who love to give us advice and stuff like that, could do the same. But what do you think are some small baby steps to get to that actionable big steps, hopefully in the future, for people who are listening to us?
I think one of those baby steps is just listening to something like this, right? Because whether or not you're chronically ill, disabled, or not at all, and you're able-bodied, I think this opens up your mind towards, how can we be more of an ally to the community, but also how can we be an ally to ourselves?
Right.
I think one of the things that my mom had done early on, and I'm very fortunate in this regard, my mom understood the value of mental health, and she put me in therapy when I got very sick.
Right.
And she also put me in support groups. Now, right now, because of the pandemic, we have virtual support groups. I do find those helpful, but I think what really helped me was sort of the in-person support group, the interaction, especially with other women, and seeing other women who had fruitful marriages and relationships. Whether or not they were Indian did not matter. They were not Indian.
Right.
They were not, South Asian, period. But I was like, oh my God, I've been guilting and shaming myself all these years. And these people are happily married or happily in relationships, and nobody looks down on them for, having these illnesses.
Right.
And I think that really opened my mind. I think that it's important to hear what your community, racial and ethnic community, has to say about chronic illnesses and disabilities. Sort of soak that in.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to expand yourself into your disease area or even outside of your disease area,
right.
because a lot of what we're going through is similar. There's sort of niches, right? There's the South Asian community, there's your disease area, but this entire chronic illness sort of community, or this entire community sort of advocating for the differently abled, voices. I think getting involved, seeing what other people have to say, educating yourself on what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, also deciding for yourself, if you are a part of the chronically ill community, what is acceptable to you and what is not acceptable to you.
Right.
I think setting those boundaries in your mind, even writing them down for yourself in a diary or journal, is really important as a person who's chronically ill. As a person who, might be a daughter or son or sister or brother or parent of a child dealing with this, I think listening to these things, reading blog posts, reading articles on these topics allows you to become a better ally. I think these are the ways that we can understand ableism, that we can sort of become better allies to different communities that, house disabilities, that house chronic illnesses. Because otherwise it's really hard to understand. I think there's a lot of rhetoric around racism, around sexism, but there is not enough about ableism. And there still isn't like sort of this, guideline or this approach to how do you approach people with chronic illnesses, especially not in our community. So, I just finished actually last night writing a research paper on ableism in the South Asian community and South Asian diaspora. And I'm thinking to actually, once it's graded and, finalized and stuff like that, actually post it to my blog, because I feel like that in and of itself, as a research paper, I talk about experiences a lot. I do interviews a lot. And I work with other people with disabilities in the South Asian community, outside of the South Asian community. But seeing research validate your experience around what's going on in our community is also extremely important, because that justifies how you've been feeling. Right. So I think it's really important to read, to listen, even if you're not ready to contribute yourself. Right. I don't think that everybody, needs to feel comfortable to do that. There were many years in which I couldn't speak about this, right. And I listened. And I think that's an okay place to be. That's a perfect place to be. Whatever is your jam, right. Like that's how I look at it. But I think that there's clear things that we can do to help ourselves, and that we can do to help our families and support systems understand these things better. And this is where I think we can help the most, is reading these things, listening to these things, but also becoming aware of some of the, there's a flood of online support groups now, but I think what worked really well for me was the in-person ones, because right. Yeah. There was that, you see them, you can go out to eat with them, or go for maybe a walk with them, or just sit and have like a cup of tea with them. Yeah. You get that vibe for who they are. And as a group, you get that vibe. It's very different in person, and it makes you feel more accepted, and it makes you feel like you can actually accept yourself as a result.
Right. Thank you so much. Literally. We're going to make a beautiful checklist out of everything you just said, because I feel like it's important.
So many important notes.
It's important to take all of those into, I feel like actionable items when they're in front of you, even if you can do one in like a month or whenever, it can make you feel better.
Yeah.
And once more, thank you so much for sharing your story. It was such an honor to listen to you.
And I feel like I can keep on listening for hours.
Yes. It's true.
And thank you so much for having me on your podcast, and for this conversation, and for this platform, because we need so much more of this. And thank you. For supporting your mom and being so understanding and empathetic to our cause.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're trying. On that note, we always invite our guest to end with, we say thank you so much and blah, blah, blah.
Have a great week.
And don't worry about Log Kya Kahenge. And when we invite our guests to say, don't worry about Log Kya Kahenge with us. So with that note, we're going to end. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. Have a great week.
Yes.
And definitely don't worry about Log Kya Kahenge. Yay!
Yourselves.